The sun was bright, but the air felt cold as Margaret stood on the sidewalk. She clutched her small purse tightly, her fingers pressing into the soft leather. Across the driveway, her son's brand-new sports car gleamed under the afternoon light. Its polished red paint sparkled, its engine hummed softly, almost like it was showing off. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains and porch railings, their whispers carrying across the street like little sharp needles. Margaret could feel their eyes on her. She could feel their quiet judgment, their curiosity, their pity. But she couldn't move. Her son, Daniel, stood by the car door with a wide grin. His excitement filled the air as he admired his new prize, running his hand along the sleek curves of the vehicle. Finally, he turned toward her, completely unaware of the weight pressing down on her chest. "Where did you get the money?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it trembled with something between fear and disbelief. Daniel shrugged like it was nothing. "It's not like you were using it, Mom." His tone was casual, almost bored. Margaret's stomach twisted. Her fingers loosened around the small wallet in her hand, the one she had opened that morning to find nearly empty. She had been saving that money for years, quietly, carefully. It wasn't much, but it was supposed to help her when she retired, when things got harder. Now it was gone. He watched her for a moment, as if waiting for a reaction, but she couldn't speak. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She felt frozen, like her voice had been stolen along with the money. "It was just sitting there," he added, as if that explained everything. "Besides, you wouldn't know what to do with that kind of money anyway. I've got plans." The words landed like heavy stones, one after another. Margaret blinked, her vision blurring as her heartbeat grew louder in her ears. Her own son. The boy she had raised, cared for, sacrificed for, now standing there smiling beside his shiny new car, speaking to her like she was nothing. The neighbors whispered again. She caught glimpses of their faces, small sideways glances quickly, pulled away when she turned her head. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody stepped forward. They all just watched. Daniel slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The car roared to life, its smooth purr filling the silence between them. He looked out the window, offering her a final shrug and a half smile. "Relax, Mom. You'll be fine." And with that, he pulled away, the tires crunching against the gravel as the car disappeared down the street. Margaret stood there, still gripping the empty wallet, her heart pounding in her chest. The world around her felt distant, like everything was happening underwater. She couldn't cry. Not here, not in front of them, but something inside her shifted. It didn't break like glass. It cracked like ice, deep and quiet. The hurt was sharp, but beneath it, something else began to stir. The soft clinking of dishes echoed in her mind as Margaret sat quietly at her kitchen table. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. She stared down at her hands, remembering how many hours those same hands had worked to give her son everything. She could still see herself behind the counter at the diner. The greasy smell of fried eggs and coffee soaked into her clothes as she moved quickly between tables, balancing plates, refilling cups, smiling at strangers while exhaustion sat heavy on her shoulders. She had taken every shift they offered. Morning, night, double shifts. Anything to keep food on the table and the lights on. When Daniel was small, he would sit at the corner booth after school, coloring quietly as she worked. She'd sneak him little plates of fries and chocolate milk when her manager wasn't looking. Every tip she earned went into a small envelope she kept hidden in the kitchen cabinet. It was for him, always for him. Margaret had dreams once, too. She wanted to go back to school, open a small shop, maybe sell books or flowers, something simple that made her happy. But dreams like that didn't fit into a life where bills piled up and shoes wore thin faster than she could replace them. So she folded those dreams up gently and tucked them away, telling herself, one day. When Daniel turned 16, she surprised him with his first car. It wasn't much, a dented old sedan with too many miles, but the look on his face made every long night worth it. She watched him drive off with his friends that evening, her heart full of pride and worry. She cheered the loudest at his high school graduation, standing alone in the crowd, her hands clapping until they stung. She took photos, wiped tears, and smiled so wide her cheeks ached. She had done it. She had gotten him there. Every time he stumbled, she was there. When he wanted to take a year off school to figure things out, she nodded and found a way to cover his rent. When he lost his first job, she paid his car insurance so he could keep driving. When he called late at night, panicked over another mistake, she answered every time. She never complained, never asked for anything back. She told herself it was what mothers did. You give, you sacrifice, you hold steady so they can chase what you never could. But now, as she sat in the quiet house, the emptiness pressed against her chest. She thought of his smile earlier, standing next to that shiny new car, shrugging like her sacrifice meant nothing. Did he ever really see me? The question floated in her mind, heavy and sharp. Had he seen the tired circles under her eyes after those long double shifts? The dinners she skipped so he could have enough? The years of saying I'm fine, even when she wasn't? She had poured her whole life into giving him more than she ever had. And now he acted like what was hers had always been his to take. Margaret swallowed hard, her throat tightening. She pressed her hands together on the table, feeling the familiar ache in her fingers from years of work. The house was quiet, too quiet, but somewhere inside her, beneath the pain and disappointment, something else quietly stirred. Not anger, not yet, but something close. The bank statement came in the mail 2 days later. Margaret almost didn't open it at first. She knew what it should say. That small savings account had been her quiet comfort for years. Not much, but enough to make her feel safe, enough to hold on to when everything else slipped. She tore open the envelope slowly, her hands steady but cold. Her eyes scanned the paper once, twice, 3 times, as if her mind couldn't catch up to what it was seeing. The balance stared back at her. 0.00. The air in the room grew thin. She read the transaction history. Large withdrawals, all within the past month. She didn't recognize half of them. Her breath caught as she sank into the nearest chair, staring at the paper in her hands. She felt the numbness spread up her arms, into her chest, freezing her in place. When Daniel walked in later that evening, humming to himself, she didn't look up right away. She heard the door click shut, the sound of his keys dropping onto the counter, his phone buzzing with messages. The normal sounds of his life moving forward. She lifted the paper slowly, her voice calm but shaking underneath. "You emptied my account." He glanced at the paper in her hand, his face barely flickering. "Yeah," he said casually, like it was nothing. "That was everything I had." Her voice cracked, but she held it steady. Daniel sighed, like he was explaining something simple to a child. "Look, Mom, you weren't doing anything with it. It was just sitting there. I invested it." "Invested?" "In my future," he said, smiling like it was some grand idea. "The car, some startup I'm working on, a few other things. You wouldn't understand." Margaret's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear his words. Her hands gripped, the paper tighter. "You had no right," she whispered. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that stung worse than the words. "Come on, Mom. You've had your life. I need mine now. You always told me to chase my dreams, remember? Well, that's what I'm doing." Her lips parted, but no words came. The room spun slightly, but she forced herself to sit still, to breathe through it. He grabbed his keys from the counter and headed for the door, still smiling like none of this mattered. "Don't stress, okay? Everything's going to work out. Trust me." Margaret followed him with her eyes as he stepped outside. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the driveway. She watched as he slid into the red sports car, the one her savings had bought, the one he had no right to own. The engine roared to life as the taillights lit up, glowing red in the dimming evening light. She sat frozen at the window, her hands resting limp in her lap now, the bank statement lying crumpled on the floor beside her chair. The car backed out slowly, then disappeared down the street, and she sat in the silence, feeling the final crack. Inside her chest, not loud, not angry, just numb. Everything she had built, everything she had given, it was all taken. And the person who had taken it was the one she loved most. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just sat there, staring at the space he left behind. And in that stillness, something inside her began to change, something she didn't fully recognize yet. But it was there. The days that followed stretched out like a long, empty hallway. Margaret sat at her kitchen table each morning, staring at her phone. She dialed Daniel's number again, her thumb hesitating before pressing the green button. The call rang and rang before falling to voicemail. She didn't bother leaving another message. She had already left several, all with the same quiet words. "Please call me." But the phone never rang back. At first she told herself he was busy, maybe overwhelmed, maybe avoiding a fight. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear he had no intention of answering. The silence was sharper than any argument. She tried reaching out to a few friends, women she had known for years, women who used to sit with her at book clubs or meet for coffee on slow afternoons. But each call ended with the same polite, careful distance. "Margaret, I really don't want to take sides. I hope everything works out between you two." I'm sure he didn't mean it like that. Their voices were soft, nervous, like they didn't want to say the wrong thing, like her pain was inconvenient for them. After a few conversations like that, she stopped calling altogether. She could hear it in their voices. They didn't want to get involved. Her world, once full of people, now felt painfully small. Her birthday arrived on a Thursday. She woke early, the habit of years pulling her from sleep long before the sun fully rose. She sat up, glancing at her phone, half expecting a message. Nothing. By noon, the house was still quiet. She made herself a small cup of tea and stared out the window, watching cars pass. She imagined him remembering. She imagined the phone ringing, but it never did. Evening came, and still not a single call, not even a text. The cake she didn't buy. The candle she didn't bother lighting. Instead, she pulled leftover chicken from the refrigerator and warmed it in the microwave. She set one plate at the table. No decorations, no music, no company. Just the hum of the appliance and the ticking clock on the wall. She ate slowly, forcing down each bite as the cold air in the kitchen settled heavy on her shoulders. The silence was louder than any voice could have been. When the plate was empty, she placed it gently in the sink and washed it by hand. The water ran warm over her fingers, but her chest felt hollow. Later, she sat in the living room, the dim light of the lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. The house, once filled with conversation, laughter, and the chaos of raising a child, now felt like a shell. The only sound was the faint buzz of the refrigerator and the distant hum of cars, far down the street. She stared at the empty chair across from her and whispered into the quiet, "You couldn't even call." Her voice broke for just a moment, but no tears came. Not anymore. The well had run dry. The quiet didn't answer her. It just sat there, wrapping around her like a heavy blanket she couldn't push off. She pulled her sweater tighter and leaned back, eyes closed, breathing through the ache. The world had moved on. The people she had loved most had moved on. And she was left here, with cold leftovers and colder silence. But somewhere deep beneath the emptiness, that small shift from before was still there, quiet, patient, waiting. The afternoon sun slipped through the dusty blinds as Margaret slowly sorted through the old papers in the hall closet. She hadn't touched this box in years. Faded folders, worn receipts, and long-forgotten documents were stacked carelessly inside. She wasn't even sure why she started going through them. Maybe just to fill the quiet hours. Her hands brushed against a thick envelope tucked beneath some old tax forms. She pulled it out and opened it, expecting to find something useless. Instead, her eyes landed on the heavy, official pages inside. The house deed. She blinked and looked closer. There. It was clear, black print, both names listed, hers first, Margaret Elaine Porter, then his. Her breath caught. After all this time, after everything, her name was still on the house. She sat down at the kitchen table and read it again, tracing the lines with her finger as her heartbeat grew stronger. This house, the one she was sitting in now, was legally still hers as much as his. The spark inside her chest flickered. Later that week, while picking up groceries, she stopped by the small mechanic shop where her old friend Joe worked. Joe had been there for years, someone she'd known long before Daniel was even born. They chatted for a while before she hesitated, finally asking the question that had been on her mind. "Joe, that new car of Daniel's, do you know whose name it's under?" Joe rubbed the back of his neck and looked at her with kind eyes. "Actually, Margaret, he financed it under your name. Your credit was better. He used it to get approved." Her stomach flipped, but not with fear this time. She swallowed, processing his words slowly. "My name?" Joe nodded. "Yeah, you're listed as the co-owner on the paperwork. I thought, you knew." She didn't respond right away. She just stood there, quietly absorbing it. Her savings had paid for it, her name had signed for it, and now she knew. Legally, that car was as much hers as it was his. The flicker inside her chest grew warmer. That night, back at home, Margaret paused by the hallway mirror. She hadn't really looked at herself in a long time. She studied her reflection now, her soft gray hair, the lines on her face, the tired eyes that had carried so much pain. But there was something else there, too. Not weakness, not a victim. Something steadier, sharper. She had leverage. For months, she had let the shame weigh her down. The betrayal had made her feel small, invisible. But the truth was different. She wasn't powerless. Not at all. The house, the car, the stolen money. It was all tied together. And she wasn't locked out of this fight. Margaret straightened her, back slightly, holding her chin a little higher. For the first time in a long time, she saw herself not as someone left behind, but as someone who still had choices. This wasn't about revenge. It was about taking back what was already hers, about not letting him walk away like none of it mattered. The control she thought was lost had quietly been sitting in her hands the whole time. She just hadn't seen it, until now. Her eyes stayed on her reflection as a calm, quiet voice whispered inside her head, "You still have something left." And this time, she intended to use it. The next morning, Margaret woke before sunrise. For the first time in months, her chest didn't feel heavy when she opened her eyes. She dressed in simple clothes, pulled her hair back neatly, and slipped her paperwork into a folder. The soft click of the front door closing behind her sounded different today. The law office was small, tucked between a bakery and a quiet bookstore downtown. She sat in the waiting room, gripping her folder gently, feeling the weight of the documents inside, but not the weight of fear anymore. When her name was called, she stepped inside. The lawyer, a kind woman named Rachel, listened carefully as Margaret laid everything out. The drained account, the car, the house deed. Rachel's face grew serious as she flipped through the papers. "You've been very patient," Rachel said, her voice calm but firm. "But you've got more standing here than he does. We'll start by reclaiming the assets legally tied to your name. No shouting, no arguments, just paperwork, Margaret nodded. That was exactly what she wanted. They began with the car. Because the loan was in her name, Rachel drafted the documents to reclaim full ownership. The bank would be notified. The financing would be restructured. Daniel's name would be removed. Legally, the car was hers. Next came the house. Rachel filed the paperwork to secure Margaret's full ownership rights. The change wouldn't happen overnight, but with the history of financial abuse and unauthorized withdrawals, the court would favor her petition. "You'll need to change the locks," Rachel said gently. "You have every right to." Margaret nodded again. She was ready. They drafted letters and forms for every piece of the puzzle: title changes, account updates, legal notices. Margaret signed them one by one, her signature steady on each line. Then came the notarized letter, a simple document, officially recorded, stating her legal claims to the house, the car, and the remaining funds. Rachel slid the letter across, the desk toward her. "Once this is filed, it's official." Margaret took the pen and signed with calm hands. There was no anger in her chest, no rage, just a quiet, steady sense of power returning. When she returned home that afternoon, the locksmith arrived. She watched as the old locks were removed and replaced, one by one. The soft clicks of the new keys turning in fresh locks sounded like the closing of old wounds. She slipped the new keys onto her keychain. No grand speeches, no fights, just a quiet reclaiming of what was already hers. The next day, she visited the DMV to finalize the car title. The clerk processed the paperwork, stamped the forms, and handed her the new registration. "All set, ma'am," he said with a polite smile. She thanked him softly, tucking the documents into her purse. Every step was small, quiet, but each one brought her closer to full control of her life again. She didn't call Daniel. She didn't explain. She didn't argue. She simply acted. The power wasn't in raising her voice. The power was in knowing she didn't have to. And as she drove home that evening, her name now fully attached to the car that once symbolized her heartbreak, Margaret felt something settle deep inside her. The strength she thought she had lost had never really left. She was simply learning how to use it differently now. The sun was just beginning to rise as Margaret pulled into the driveway. She sat in her small rental car for a moment, breathing deeply, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. The papers in her purse were all signed and filed. Everything was done. Today wasn't about talk. Today was about action. She stepped out of the car, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. The bright red sports car sat gleaming in the morning light, parked right where he always left it. She reached into her purse and pulled out the sleek key fob, the weight of it familiar now in her hand. One click. The engine roared to life. The lights flashed. The locks popped open. The sound cut through the quiet neighborhood like a bell ringing in the distance. The front door swung open. Daniel stumbled outside, still pulling on a jacket, his hair messy from sleep. His eyes went wide when he saw her standing next to the car. "Mom? What are you doing?" His voice was sharp, rising quickly. "You can't take that!" Margaret turned to face him, her voice calm, steady. "I already did." He blinked, caught off guard by how simple the words were. "That car is mine," he shouted, stepping closer. "I paid for it. You don't have the right—" Her eyes didn't waver. "You used my money, my credit, my name. It's all in my name now. You made sure of that when you signed those papers." Daniel opened his mouth again, but nothing came. For once, he had no comeback. Margaret stepped into the driver's seat, closed the door gently, and rolled down the window. She looked at him one last time. "I gave you everything for years. You decided that wasn't enough. So now, I'm taking back what's mine." Before he could respond, she pressed her foot on the gas. The car pulled smoothly out of the driveway and onto the road. She didn't speed away. She didn't need to. Slow and steady, She drove down the street, leaving him standing there, his fists clenched, his face pale. She didn't look back. The ride was smooth, the engine humming beneath her hands. But it wasn't the power of the car she enjoyed, it was the peace inside her chest. She had walked through fire, through betrayal, through silence. And now she was driving away from it all, one quiet mile at a time. A few days later, she sat at the dealership, calmly signing the paperwork to sell the car. The salesman handed her a check, his tone polite. "You made a good decision, ma'am." Margaret smiled softly. "Yes, I did." With the sale finalized, she took the check to the bank and deposited it into her new account, one with only her name on it. Not long after, she found a small house on the edge of town. It wasn't flashy or large, but it was perfect. A cozy, little place with a tiny garden, wide windows, and a quiet porch where she could sit in the evenings. She stood outside the front door the first evening, keys in hand. No one had given her this home. She didn't sacrifice for someone else to have it. She bought it with what was hers. As she stepped inside, the empty rooms welcomed her like open arms. She didn't feel lonely. She felt free. This was her space, her life, her peace. Margaret looked around, her chest rising with a deep breath. She had lost so much. But in the end, she had taken back everything that mattered, not by screaming, not by begging, just by quietly, calmly taking back what was always hers. The first call came the next morning. Margaret's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she stood by the window, sipping her tea. She glanced at the screen. It was Daniel, his name flashing again and again. She didn't move to answer. A minute later, another call. Then a text. "You had no right." She read it once, calmly, and then deleted it without a second thought. By afternoon, the tone shifted. Another text popped up. "We need to talk. Let's fix this." Margaret deleted that one too. The following days brought more messages, some angry, some almost pleading. "You didn't have to do this. I was going to pay you back. You've made your point." Each one arrived like a stone dropped into a still pond, but Margaret no longer felt the ripples. She watched. The messages come and go, like passing clouds. The voicemails followed soon after. His voice filled with frustration at first, then, slowly, regret. "Mom, I didn't mean to hurt you. Can we please just talk? Don't shut me out," but she never listened to the full recordings. She deleted each one after hearing only a second or two, unwilling to let his voice fill her house again. The power of silence had become her armor. One quiet afternoon, after the 10th missed call in a single week, Margaret drove to the phone store and requested a new number. The clerk smiled politely as he handed her the fresh SIM card. She inserted it into her phone, watching as the familiar contact list disappeared, leaving behind only blank space. It felt good, clean, like wiping. Away fingerprints from glass. Her morning settled into a new routine. Each day, just after sunrise, she slipped on her jacket and stepped outside, leash in hand. Her new dog, a gentle rescue she named Lily, trotted happily beside her. Lily had wide brown eyes and a calm presence that comforted Margaret in ways words never could. The little dog didn't care about the past, didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. She simply walked beside her, tail wagging, content to share the quiet. The neighborhood was peaceful. The sidewalks lined with old trees, their leaves gently swaying in the morning breeze. Birds chirped softly overhead, and the world seemed to hum at a gentler pace now. With each walk, Margaret felt lighter. The weight of waiting for someone to care was gone. The need for closure, for apology, for understanding. It had all faded like mist in the morning sun. Daniel still tried, but his words no longer reached her. His anger, his guilt, his sudden concern, they weren't hers to carry anymore. She had spent too many years trying to hold together what he so carelessly broke. Now, she simply let go. As she reached the small park at the end of the block, she paused on a bench, watching Lily sniff at the grass nearby. The warm sunlight fell across her face, and a soft breeze brushed through her hair. For so long, she feared being alone. She believed that silence meant emptiness. But now, sitting in the quiet, she understood. This wasn't emptiness. It was peace. Her phone buzzed once more in her pocket. Unknown number. She didn't even pull it out this time. She let it ring, let it fade. Margaret smiled softly as Lily trotted back to her side, resting her head gently against Margaret's leg. She reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears, whispering, "We're okay now, aren't we?" The sun continued to rise as the world moved on around her, and this time, she didn't feel left behind. The soft afternoon light poured through the wide window of her little house, casting a golden glow across the living room. Margaret sat on the rug with a small box open in front of her, one she hadn't touched in years. The box smelled faintly of old paper and memories. Inside were little pieces of a life she had almost forgotten: photos, school drawings, report cards, birthday cards, and letters. Her fingers brushed gently across the stack of folded notes, the ones Daniel had written when he was still small. His handwriting was crooked, the letters big and clumsy. She unfolded one carefully, the paper worn but still holding his young voice. "I love you, Mom. You're the best." She smiled softly, her chest tightening, but not breaking. The simple words pulled her back to afternoons filled with giggles, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. To the little boy who once ran into her arms without hesitation. For a moment, she let herself sit with the memory, breathing it in. The warmth of those early years hadn't disappeared. It was still here, tucked inside her, safe. She picked up another note. "Thank you for making my birthday cake. You're the best mom ever." Her hand trembled slightly as she traced her finger along the words. She had tried so hard for so long to be enough, to give enough, to hold everything together. She had sacrificed pieces of herself, not because she was weak, but because she loved him with her whole heart, and for a while, he had loved her too. The pain that came later didn't erase that. The betrayal, the selfishness. It wasn't because she had failed. It wasn't because she hadn't given enough or done enough. It was because somewhere along the way, he stopped valuing what she offered. That wasn't her failure. She breathed in slowly, feeling the truth settle quietly in her chest. She had raised him. She had loved him. She had done her part. And while he had grown into a man who could betray her, that didn't make her less of a mother. It didn't make her less of a woman. For years, she believed she was the burden. That, maybe she asked for too much, or stayed too long, or loved too hard. But sitting here now, holding these small notes in her hands, she saw it clearly. She wasn't the burden. She was the strength. She was the reason he had anything to take. The foundation he stood on was built from her sacrifices, her long nights, her quiet patience. And while he may have chosen to forget that, she never would again. Margaret gently placed the letters back into the box, closing it softly and sliding it under the coffee table. She leaned back into the couch, her hands folded calmly in her lap, her eyes drifting toward the open window where the late afternoon breeze stirred the curtains. The house was still, peaceful, hers. For so long she had waited for others to see her, to appreciate her, to love her the way she loved them. But now she understood that the only person who truly needed to see her was herself. Margaret smiled again, but this time it was stronger, deeper. She had carried the weight for years, and now she carried something lighter, her own worth. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the room, but her heart felt full, steady. She whispered softly into the quiet. "Maybe I wasn't the Burden after all, and she knew, with every piece of her, that she never had been. The evening was calm as the sky turned soft shades of pink and orange. Inside her small apartment, Margaret moved slowly through the kitchen, humming quietly. To herself, the air smelled of warm bread and roasted vegetables. Everything was simple. Everything was hers. She placed a single plate on the small wooden table. One fork, one knife, a cloth napkin folded neatly beside the plate. The flicker of a single candle lit the space with a gentle glow. No extra seats, no waiting for anyone to arrive. The quiet didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt peaceful. Safe. On the wall near the front door, the keys to her car and house hung from a small hook. Not just keys. They were symbols of everything she had taken back. The car once used to betray her. The house she had fought for. The freedom she had reclaimed, step by step. Lily curled up on the rug nearby, her small chest rising and falling, in steady rhythm. The dog opened one sleepy eye to glance at Margaret, then sighed contentedly and settled back into rest. Margaret poured herself a small glass of wine and carried it to the table. She sat down, smoothing the tablecloth with one hand. There was no tension in her chest, no fear, no waiting. For years, she had set tables for others, hoping to be noticed, hoping to be loved the way she had loved. She had worked, given, forgiven, and sacrificed. She had lost herself piece by piece, trying to hold together people who didn't see her value. But tonight was different. Tonight, she saw herself. She picked up her fork and took the first bite, tasting every simple, beautiful flavor. There was no conversation to fill the space, no voices demanding her attention, no one asking her to give more. She didn't need it. The life she had now wasn't loud, it wasn't busy. But it was honest, and it was hers. She glanced toward the window where the stars had begun to peek through the darkening sky. The world outside kept spinning, but she no longer chased after it. She didn't need anyone else to recognize her worth. She recognized it now. Margaret smiled softly, not for anyone else, but for herself. She raised her glass gently and whispered into the quiet room, "This time, I ate at my table, alone and free." The words hung in the air like a warm embrace, wrapping around her in the quiet comfort she had fought so hard to find. And for the first time in a long time, being alone didn't feel lonely. It felt like home.